I am excited to take your questions and to direct your questions to our leader, Nova Scotia NDP Leader Claudia Chender, and hopefully we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the town hall tonight. So we want to hear about your thoughts about the province, the government, and what you think we in the NDP should be doing, and our leader Claudia Chender will be ready to take your questions. So again, if you'd like to ask a question, you can press *3 on your phone. You'll get directed to an operator who will type up your question, and then I will acknowledge you when it's your turn to speak. Great. Thank you again for joining us, and we will begin. So I'll hand it over to our leader, Claudia Chender.
Thanks, Sue, and welcome, everyone. We wanted to do this town hall, this call-in, and take the opportunity to speak with and hear from as many people as possible. We're in the middle of a legislative session. There's a lot going on. There's a lot in the news. And we want to tell you a little bit about what we are thinking here and to answer as many questions as we can from all of you. It's always a joy connecting with Nova Scotians across the province and seeing so many stories of success and resilience. But I have to say that now that we're back in the legislature, I'm growing increasingly concerned about secrecy and lack of accountability, and a huge part of our job right now is asking your questions and trying to understand why the government is doing what they're doing, who it's impacting, and if there are gaps in that information, pushing for more. One of the things we've been really concerned about is the Coastal Protection Act. That was a bill that was passed by all parties. I voted for it, and so did Tim Houston when he was in opposition. But now they refuse to proclaim it. They've offered a voluntary scheme to protect our 13,000 kilometers of coastline, but it's not nearly good enough. There's over $100,000 spent on a consultation that the government won't release, and people seem to be united across the province in opposition to this strategy. Municipalities, citizens, environmental organizations are outraged, and so are we. When we pressed the minister to release the results of the survey, he claims that because only 1,200 people answered it, that meant everyone else was opposed, which, as many have pointed out, is a whole new kind of math, and one that we don't really agree with. And so the question is, what are they hiding? Why won't they release that survey? I guess we could ask the question, who's benefiting from the decision not to release it, but we already know the answer to that question because we see survey stakes in the ground, perilously close to the ocean, next to, hard rock walls that are creating huge havoc on our coastlines. And this is an issue that I know is concerning to many of you and certainly to us, but it's not just that. The Auditor General has released a scathing report about the amount of money that the government is spending without oversight. We're talking billions of dollars. We're the only province in the country that lacks this oversight. And it leads to issues like Hogan Court, where we've sunk $100 million into a healthcare facility that's more than a year late, not fit for purpose, and we still have no word when it will be open. The Hogan Court Healthcare Hotel, as my colleague Susan, our health critic, calls it, is by far the biggest financial scandal in my time in politics. This is a terrible use of healthcare dollars and is resulting in less healthcare slower. Another quieter scandal is brewing over a secret handout to the two commercial bottlers in Nova Scotia, both of whom use imported grape juice subsidized elsewhere to make wine. You may have seen this in the news. This allows these two companies to undercut our farm wineries and their amazing products, and it's shrouded, again, in secrecy. These folks are saying it could really spell potentially the end of their industry. It's already a wasted season, and yet the Premier and the Minister of Finance refuse to say if the program is active, if they've cut the checks. We don't know where it is in the budget, but we do know the threat that it poses to not just the farm wine industry, but to the local tourism industry and to the rural economy as a whole. As I said, we're in the middle of a budget session, and there is some good news. There's always bright spots, and those bright spots show that your advocacy works. Right before the session started, the government announced that they would ban the practice of childcare waitlist fees. My colleague Susie Hansen, our education spokesperson, has been pushing for this since the beginning of this government. And we were very pleased to see that happen. We know that young families are desperate for childcare, and many are paying hundreds of dollars in waitlist fees that don't guarantee them a spot. We were also thrilled after years of pressure to see the promise of a school lunch program. This is something we've been fighting for since I was first elected, and it's an idea whose time has certainly come. Details are scarce. We have questions, but if done right, it could mean a huge amount to Nova Scotian families. You may have heard about the largest tax relief in history in this budget. Well, it's not, unfortunately, but the indexation that created the relief actually mirrored legislation that we introduced, and it puts our tax brackets in line with most other provinces. I'm not sure we should be that excited about catching up to the rest of the country, but it's certainly something that was past due, and it's the first step in a lot more work that has to be done on progressive tax reform. We wish, of course, that the Premier would take more of our ideas, but unfortunately there was little or nothing in this budget to address our housing crisis in a meaningful way, to reduce the doctor wait list, which as of this week has again reached a new milestone. I think it's 156,000 Nova Scotians without a doctor, to fix our emergency rooms, to keep them open, to reduce the huge amount we are paying for power. And again, this government failed to index income assistance, which not only will lead to more heartache on the housing and survival front across much of the province, but really is it's a travesty, and it shows where their heart is and isn't. There's a lot more I could say, but I wanted to talk about the province for a minute from where I see it. Of course, the real point of this tonight is to hear from you, and I think that starts now. So I'll hand it back over to Sue, and we'll start taking your questions.
Okay, thanks, Claudia. And the first person that we have on the line is Pauline from, it looks, well, I don't know what Pauline's from, but Pauline, go ahead with your question for Claudia.
Yes. The question I have is that I find that they are pushing the seniors out of their homes that they worked hard for, because with the taxes, the light bill, the phone bill, the oil bill, everything is gone so high. And most, 99.9 of them are on pension. And I don't see where the government sees where the seniors can afford all this. It's just like living from day to day and lucky to get food or heat.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Colleen, and we hear this all the time. And we know that for many folks this is new, and of course a lot of this is because there's so much inflation. And for seniors who, as you say, are on a fixed income, those incomes don't rise with inflation. And so people are feeling really stuck. And, you know, a lot of us, we have town halls around housing, and increasingly the folks who are most squeezed by our housing situation are seniors. And so, you know, we have a lot of things we think the government could be doing right now to help this. This is one of the reasons we focus so much on affordable housing, because so many seniors need affordable housing. And right now people are in a really tricky place. If you're renting and your rent's going up, of course your income's not. If you own a home and you might want to move, where are you going to move to, because rents are so high? And of course, you know, if you're in a situation where you might need long-term care, we still don't have those vacancies. But we've also been looking at things like a seniors income supplement, which other provinces have and which could really help for seniors. All of that, and we also know that there were certain programs that were targeting folks, like the heating assistance rebate program, which I know a lot of seniors use, which was cut back this year from $1,000 to $600. And I know people were counting on that. So, Pauline, I really appreciate you calling in. I hope that addresses some of the things I think government could be doing. But certainly, I think the bottom line is they could be doing a lot more for seniors right now.
Great. Thank you very much for those comments, Pauline. And just to remind everyone, if you'd like to call in with a question, you can press *3 at any time during the call. You will be directed to an operator and then put in the queue for me to call on your name and then pass on your question to Claudia. So our next caller is Timothy, please. Timothy, go ahead.
Good evening. How are you, Claudia? Good evening. How are you, Claudia?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very good. Listen, thanks for doing this. It's always nice to have the ability to communicate with. But that being said, my question is this as it relates to I'm in Lower Sackville with the home. The lack of communication and leadership, both from the MLA and the MP, in my opinion, has certainly divided the community. We all understand there's complexities to this issue, but in my opinion, it could have and should have been handled much differently. And unfortunately, the lack of questions had created an issue for people to have to speculate, and that's never a good thing. But at the end of the day, we know there's a problem. It takes leadership and common sense to try to solve an issue, but unfortunately, we're not getting any help or assistance from either or elected official.
Well, I appreciate you calling in, Timothy, and I think Lower Sackville is a great example. You said Lower Sackville, right?
Yeah.
Or Middle Sackville?
Yes.
I can't remember. Okay. I mean, I think it's a great example of a community that is, full of folks who are being squeezed right now. And I know that between the folks who are having a hard time paying their own mortgages or rent to the folks who have been in the ball field and now are relocating to other places, it's certainly not lost on us that there's no perfect solution. But what we've seen around the government's efforts to address these things is, again, not a lot of communication, as I think you pointed out, with communities and people who want to understand what's going on, and not a lot of seeming thought about the best way to address these issues and to do things. And so I know we've heard that from folks in Sackville, we've heard that from folks in Cape Breton, I think what that points to is how important it is, and thanks for shouting out our efforts to put this on tonight, but I think it shows how important it is for government to be communicating with people. And so, this is a case where government decided it was going to move quickly. It chose its own path without talking to other folks. And while, we are broadly supportive of things that keep people safe and housed, we also understand that communities need to come along, especially the communities where those folks are. And so I hear what you're saying, and it's certainly something that we have been communicating directly to government and to the relevant ministers about, is that need for community conversation and consultation.
Thank you very much, Timothy, for those questions and comments. We will go now to Susan M., please. Okay, maybe we're having, maybe.
What was the name again?
Susan?
Oh, okay. Yes. Good evening, Mrs. Chender. Hello?
Hi, Susan.
Hi. I am wondering, I am wondering if the government has any plans to address the laws of tenancy that exist in Nova Scotia, because the tenancy always tends, or most of the time, they tend to rule in favor of the landlord or the building owner.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had a problem with maintenance in my apartment, a severe problem from February 23 up to December 23. It's not the first time it happened, and it's okay now, but there's a good possibility of a reoccurrence. And I'm just wondering, I hesitated to go to tenancy because I fear possible repercussion, and I also fear that if they did rule in my favor, I might fear repercussion. And also in Nova Scotia, they tend to rule in favor of the building owners. So I'm just wondering if there's any laws to address these tenancy issues. When you put in a complaint, they talk to you. They give you a telephone appointment, and I don't think the telephone is an effective means of communication for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Susan. I mean, I think to your main question, this is a huge issue, and it's one that's really been front and center in our advocacy for a long time. We need a more functional tenancy board, and there's a lot under that heading. But one of the things we need is an enforcement branch. So as you know clearly, the tenant rules are complaint-driven, and that does put an unfair burden on tenants who are experiencing a challenge. And it does lead to fear of repercussion because it's really your word against theirs. In other jurisdictions, there's an enforcement branch. So you could call the tenancy board and say, you know, I'm having this problem, and they could send someone out to inspect. We think that would make a huge difference. We've put that on the order paper, and we have put that legislation forward several times. Just one second. There's a little bit of an echo on the line. I'm not sure why. But the other thing is we need comprehensive rent control. So we need control so that we know that people are able to stay in their homes. If landlords need to raise the rent for something, they can do that, but they need to apply to do that. They need to be able to they need to be able to show that that's reasonable. When we raise this in the legislature, we always get the response that we need to balance. We need to balance the rights of landlords and tenants. And while we recognize that, you know, financial hardship is impacting pretty much everyone in some degree right now, the reality is that it's tenants, in many cases tenants on fixed incomes, who are experiencing the brunt of this inflationary crisis and of our broken residential tenancy system. So the short answer to your question is we haven't seen any new legislation, but boy, have we been pushing for it. And I think we know from you and from people right across the province how important it is, and we will continue to. And the last thing I'll say is there are resources available. So you can call Dalhousie Legal Aid, you can call Nova Scotia Legal Aid, and if there is an issue with the maintenance in your apartment, you can also call the HRM bylaw enforcement, because they do come to your unit and they can order that something be repaired. So I would really suggest that you pursue any of those avenues. And thanks so much for calling.
Thank you so much, Susan. Next on the order, we have Artina Campbell, please. Artina, go ahead.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, dear. I'm really good. One of my concerns, it's only one. I'm a senior. Our biggest concern there is the health care. It's, as we know, there's so many people without doctors. People are having hard times getting surgeries. We fear that if things do not change, we need surgeries, we are going to have to sell our home to get a knee replacement or a hip. We can't afford that.
No, we shouldn't have to.
Well, we don't know.
You shouldn't have to, Artina.
But we don't get the answers, dear. That's the scary part. Or you can't get in. It may take a couple of years before you can even get in.
Yep. Yeah, well, listen, as you know, I'm sure, you're not alone. And across Cape Breton Island, across the province, this is the same situation. And, you know, our big frustration is that this was a government that was elected to fix healthcare, and boy, have they spent a lot of money. And yet we keep hearing these same stories. You know, the things that people really need, like those hip replacements or knee replacements, or to be able to get through the regional in less than a couple of days if you're in an emergency, or to have an ambulance come, those things aren't changing right now. And I think it's really an issue of priority. So you said, you know, you're worried about having to sell your home to get a knee replacement. I mean, that shouldn't be something that you have to think about at all in this country. And unfortunately, what we see from this government is increasingly they're partnering with private healthcare businesses for, you know, what they call innovation. But those innovations aren't going to help you, and they're not going to help me. I guess they're going to help people who run those companies. But at the end of the day, what we really need is for them to make a difference in this system in the way that's, you know, going to help folks like you and people in your community. So I wish I had an answer for you, Archina. But I guess what I would say is, you know, you're not alone, and you know, please speak up, because again, you know, this government said they were going to fix healthcare. They've got an awful lot of money to do it, and we need to make sure they're spending it in the right way. So that's what Susan and I are doing in the legislature as we go through this budget. But it sure helps to have people like you who are reminding the government of the impact of some of their decisions. So thanks so much for calling in.
Yes, thank you very much, Christina. Just before we move on to the next question, I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions, you can press *3 anytime during the call on your phone, and you'll be directed to an operator who will then put you in the queue for me to then call on you when it's your turn. So the next person that we're going to hear from is John McDonald, please.
Be my call.
Thanks for calling in tonight.
You're welcome. I have a question. I'd like you to explain some of the reasons why nobody seems to be worried about the injured workers here in Cape Breton. Houston and John White cut after financing. We don't have anybody to represent us around here. They want us to call Halifax. At least when the injured workers were in Sydney, we could go in, we could sit down with them and talk to them and let them explain things to us. But we don't have that anymore. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that the NDP can do to try and help it? Because I had calls into the Conservatives and none of them called me back.
Yeah, well, listen, Jim, this isn't lost on us, and certainly, you know, my colleague Kendra Coombs, who's in Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier, she, I know, spends a ton of her time talking to injured workers. And I don't know if that's because they're all in her district or if she's the only one who will take their call. But the reality is that we know this is a huge issue. Certainly something we're looking at is the closure of those centres, but bigger than that, there's a whole review going on right now of the Workers' Compensation Board all together. And I know they're doing consultations across the province. And so as a part of that, I certainly hope folks like yourself will be able to give that input because it is so important. And certainly there are so many folks on the island who are impacted. And we know that this is a system that just hasn't been fair to workers for a long, long time. So, you know, what I would say is I wouldn't hesitate to reach out to Kendra's office. And if you drop us an email or call us after, we can connect you to that. But also, you know, we can send you some information about the upcoming consultations, as you can make sure to have your voice heard. And is email? Do you use the email, Jim? John?
Hello?
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Do you use email, John?
No, I don't.
Well, let me give you a phone number then that you can call. Just a second. We'll read it out in a second. Are you going to stay on the line for a few minutes? I know that you're muted, so we'll read out that phone number in a second, and then we'll make sure that you can give us a call and we can connect you with that information. But I appreciate your question, and I would encourage you to give Kendra a call.
I'll do that.
Okay, thanks so much, and I really appreciate you calling in, and certainly, here in this party, we haven't forgotten about you. Don't worry, and we will call and connect you to some resources. So thanks again so much for calling in.
Thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, John. Yes, and so we'll get the number that you need to call to get in touch in just a second, so that'll give you a chance to get a piece of paper and a pencil to write it down. If there are people on the line who don't get in by the end of our call, I will tell you, and I'll say this again later, but if you'd like to email a question for us to receive later and respond to later, the email address is feedback@nsndc.ca. So, the next caller is Quinn. So, Quinn, go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, am I on the line? Hello?
Yep, you sure are.
Hi, Claudia. It's me again.
Hi, Quinn.
So I had a
Thanks for
question.
calling in.
Yeah. So I had a question about emergency response and how government really didn't seem like they did much. So we've experienced a lot in the past couple of years. We've had floods. We've had fires. We've had hurricanes. These aren't like normal. Hurricane season is just around the corner. We keep on getting more and more severe storms. Myself, I was affected by it greatly. I lost my house in Fiona, coming up on the 2-year anniversary of that. I spent 6 months basically homeless. If it wasn't for the resilience of my mom and close friends lending us their home, we would have been out on the street. It doesn't really seem like they're doing much to prevent that from happening again. We got outbid on every house. The only ones that were available were in horrible condition. It said in the description on realtor.ca that one of them had a wet basement. What's a wet basement? It was the only house in our region that was even affordable. Luckily, we were able to get a rental back in April, so coming up on a year on that. But obviously these aren't options for everyone. There are going to be a lot of people that if there's another hurricane, and there probably will be, that displaces a ton of people, they're going to be forced out to live in their cars. Single moms, seniors, teens like me. It's not safe or healthy for anyone. So I guess my question is, what can government do to ensure that people like me or others in the community aren't left out in the cold after literally losing everything to another storm like this?
Yeah, it's such an important question, and I'm so glad you're asking it, Quinn. Number one, shout out to your mom, who is an incredibly resilient person, as you said. But we shouldn't have to rely on that kind of resilience. And certainly, knowing a little bit about what happened to you, but you're speaking for a lot of folks who are impacted by Fiona, particularly on Cape Breton Island, but in other parts of the province too. I think there's a few issues that all come into play here. One is, as you said, the emergency response. So we need a more rapid and more effective way of responding to these increasingly frequent climate crises. And we need a way to ensure that people can actually safeguard, first of all, and then repair their homes in a timely way, and that they're supported to do that if they need to be. That's certainly something that we are pushing for. But if you step back from that, what we really need is to deal with the kind of existential threat of climate change. And so off the top, I spoke about the Environmental Protection Act. That's a great example. We need to be doing the things we can to prevent some of the most terrible impacts of these weather events from really impacting our families in the way that they impacted yours. Some of that has to do with insurance. Some of that has to do with building codes, how we build, where we build. This government also refuses to adopt the most recent building code, which is much more climate resilient than the way people are building right now. and that's something we're pushing for. But the last is the housing crisis, and that housing crisis stretches from one tip of the province to the very other tip where you and your family live. And, you know, I think the reality is that we need a crisis response to the lack of affordable housing in this province. Nobody should be forced into a home with a wet basement. You know, that means mold, and that means problems. And so we need to have enough housing for all the people who live here, period. And so I think, you know, as you and I have talked about in the past, that those are all certainly things that we are working on. But thanks so much for raising that, and I think it's really important that people, you know, teenagers in particular, are thinking about these things, because this is your world, and, you know, we're working on it on your behalf. But I so appreciate you being involved and calling in tonight. So thanks so much, Quinn.
Yes, thank you very much, Quinn, for calling in. And thank you to everyone who's calling in. We have a number of people in the queue right now, but if you do want to ask a question, we have about 20-ish minutes left for questions. So if you do have a question that you'd like to give to Claudia, you can press *3 at any time on your phone, and then you will be directed to an operator who will then put you into the queue for me to acknowledge your name, and then go ahead and ask your question. So our next caller is Irene. Irene M. Oh no, sorry, Irene. Before we take your question, I wanted to give John the phone number. So John, the phone number to call to get connected to those services Claudia was talking about is 902-423-9217. 902-423-9217. Okay, and thanks for waiting, Irene. You can go ahead now.
I'm waiting there a little bit, but however, I'd like to bring up a few points that I often wonder, how are we going to change this? One of the biggest things I think is responsible for what's happening so quickly is immigration. And I think in the last few years, we've been taking thousands and thousands of people in with no regards for our social problems. And that's why we seem to think, how did this happen? It's happened so quickly. And, you know, I think it's wonderful, by the way, that you gals have decided to work on this program, and also to refer people to Kendra Coombs, whose office is in Whitney Pier, and you just give her number, which is 902-423-9217. And, but again, I'm thinking, how can we kind of work on this so quickly? And I think that what we have to do, first of all, we're talking about seniors here, and they're the largest part of Cape Breton's population. A lot of these seniors now can't afford a newspaper, so they really can't get too much information from there. We also, you know, there's so many things that, like, they don't, all seniors, I'm 81, I'm on the computer, my husband isn't, he's 85, doesn't have an interest in it either. So a lot of information and everything that's important is made for the upcoming generation, of which they are headed into a world of technology, and they have to do that. But in the meantime, with where there's greater populations for seniors, we have to do something. And the only thing that I can think of is that can happen. I see problems all over the place, and I say to myself, I wish I could help, because I've seen them work without costing money. You know, nurse practitioners in emergency could call out so many people without a doctor that they need a prescription. People are broken arm. All that work can be done instead of you go into emerge, you wait for a doctor after he's made his recommendations, and all tests have to be done at that point. It's a never-ending, long, grueling time, and we have waits here that are not even. You don't even want to think about it. They're 10 hours and more sometimes. So I'm thinking, department heads, you know, of all of of the, when I say department heads, I know how government works right at the top, even for the premier. There's 16 lawyers under him. There's 2 people, and when there's a situation...
Irene, so is your question really about the healthcare crisis? I just want to make sure that...
Yes, it's a healthcare crisis, and not only that, but it's so that all the problems we can really work on the media and everybody, and getting seniors out to a place where the key people... I'm talking about the mayor, and I'm talking about the premier. I'm talking about even the prime minister. If they could get the key people where they can hear it themselves, then we can get something done. But what's happening? And then your job would be a lot easier too. And then you can really call through. Some problems you are always going to be there, but I really blame it all on...
Yeah, I think you know what, we're gonna just, I'm gonna just take a stab at that, because I know there's a few people waiting, and time is short, but I really appreciate you calling in. And I think the issue you raise is a really important one. Increasingly, people are cut off from information. There's no question. And, you know, we now have a situation where Saltwire might be going bankrupt, and it's going to be even harder. So even those folks who can't afford a newspaper might not be able to get one. And this goes back to what we were talking about before at the very beginning, which is around communication. It's really important that government is communicating with folks. And as much of that as can be in person, the better. And certainly, you know, with us, you know, Kendra and myself, we have regular town hall meetings. You know, we try and chat with folks. You know, the earlier caller from the island was talking about the lack of information from WCB that people can access in person. And I know for seniors that technology gap is real for many. And that's certainly something we're conscious of. It's one of the reasons we chose the telephone for tonight. And I, you know, will really take your comments to heart. So thanks so much for calling.
Thank you very much, Irene. Just wanted to continue on now with Matthew. Matthew, go ahead, please.
Hey, yeah, I'll try to keep it as concise as I can here, even though I think, you know, everybody's got a lot of good points on a lot of different issues, and I think everybody's kind of impacted by several issues. But I was in intelligence for years and then got hurt, and after spending a long time in the healthcare system, decided to go back to Dal and study healthcare, and I've been there for a few years now, and with a lot of concentration on primary care and the wait list for a primary care provider, and, you know, obviously seeing it go up from, I mean, just a few years ago it was less than 100,000. But the point being, I was just wondering perhaps if the party, or if there had been any discussions with any sort of level of government about major structural changes to healthcare, and specifically, and it was really disheartening to see and I've read the entire deal that the province just made with doctors again, and the investment in physician's assistants I really don't agree with, because the research shows that nurse practitioners provide equal care or better care than a family doctor, and they do it at roughly 66% less in terms of payments, and you know, that's obviously would be a difficult change to sell, but there's 20 years of data on it, and there's really not much, you know, risk to it, other than, you know, you're certainly going to have pushback from all, you know, any doctors group that exists, but the quality of care that people get really doesn't seem to ever be talked about by anybody. Even if you do have a family doctor, you know, a lot of people have experienced somebody with the hand on the door, and they're ready to get out the door and move on. So anyway, I was worried about structural change.
I appreciate you raising that. And, you know, in the last election, when Tim Houston had a 5-word election platform, which is, I'm going to fix healthcare, maybe that's 4 words, maybe it's 5, depending. But you know, what we were talking about is massively expanding the networks of collaborative care that were started under the NDP government. And to me, Matthew, that's the best of both worlds, because then you have collaborative care centers, and they are slowly expanding across the province because it is the only model that makes sense in our current situation. So you still have a physician, but you also have a nurse practitioner. You also have other allied health professionals, so that that quality of care is maintained, so that you can see someone when you need to, so that you see the physician when you need the physician, but you don't see the physician when you don't need to see the physician. I think many people do have nurse practitioners right now as a primary care provider. I think the feedback is good. My read of the inclusion of physician assistants is not that that's an either-or situation. I think the addition of nurse practitioners to the healthcare system is still something that is actively happening. I think they're being recruited. I think they're being trained. This is my understanding, but that we simply need more providers. And so, you may know this from your previous career, but what we hear from folks in emergency rooms and in other clinics is that essentially physician assistants can just stretch a doctor's capacity in time. So they can help more people to be seen more quickly and to be dealt with appropriately. So I think there's a place for both. But your point is taken about physician assistants, and I agree with you. And, to your question of what is the structural change that's needed, I think the structural change that's needed is that we need to focus on the things that impact people's lives. We have a healthcare innovation hub in the Nova Center in downtown Halifax that we're paying who knows how much money for to, innovate the very latest technology in various kind of healthcare areas, which is great. But if we haven't first made sure that people have access to primary care, that people are attached to primary care, that we heard about the waits at the regional, the waits at the QE2 are also terrible. Many folks in other parts of the province don't have an open emergency room at all. These are the things that matter to people on the ground, and these are the things that we think that the government needs to prioritize from a structural perspective to make sure that people's needs are being met, and we don't see that happening. So I really appreciate your call, I agree.
Great, thank you very much, Matthew. We have another caller. Before we move on, just remind everyone when you're calling to make your comments brief so that we can hear from as many people as we can. We have about 10 minutes left. So next we're going to go to Al. Al, go ahead with your question.
Thanks for taking my call. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yep, we sure can.
I just wanted to understand, I'm from Sydney and I'm on contract working as an executive director for a homeless organization in Moncton. And what will we do to mobilize the nonprofit sector, providing the nonprofit sector more support in reducing barriers to get access, to get additional access quickly to grant funding? So today, millions and millions of dollars are being forwarded, given to, granted to large corporations and private developers, but very little money or barriers, tremendous barriers exist for nonprofits to take part in that. And here's my specific example. I'll keep it brief. There's not a grant program that I know for a nonprofit to participate in a granted housing development program that doesn't involve the nonprofit spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own money to do it. And I don't know a nonprofit that can afford that.
I think that's a really, really important question, Al, and I really appreciate you asking it. For us, I think this comes down to a fundamental belief that has really been sharpened over the last couple of years of watching this government work, that in order to address the housing crisis, we need to massively grow and support the non-market housing sector. So, the government's announced some public housing, that's a good thing. It's also a drop in the bucket. A couple hundred units against, probably over 10,000 people who are in pretty immediate core housing need is not going to move the needle. But it's places, I'm familiar with in this province, there are nonprofit, non-market housing providers right across the country, right across the province, who are doing amazing work. But as you say, they don't have architects on staff, they don't have lawyers on staff, they don't have engineers on staff. So that initial outlay is often the barrier. And so I think this comes with restricting some of those programs to non-market applicants, housing programs, and then supporting those non-market applicants to apply for those programs, which I think is probably what you're pointing at. I know that there have been some efforts here at some pretty innovative partnerships between non-market, non-profit housing providers and the public and the private sector, and so far they haven't really worked out that well. So, where we have seen success in real affordability here in Nova Scotia are, organizations like Dartmouth Nonprofit Housing or Add Some House or the YWCA, who are building and providing housing that is genuinely affordable, Akuma outside of Dartmouth, because that's their mission. We really don't think, based on our conversations with private developers, number one, private developers, many of them don't want to be building non-market, non-profit, affordable housing. It's actually not part of their business plan. They can't make a profit on it. And, they are trying to be a profitable business. So we think it's kind of folly, the amount of kind of money and energy and opportunity that this government is giving to those private sector actors, when all of that money and energy could be so much better spent, number one, giving opportunity to non-market housing providers, but also building the sector. Because I'm sure, as you know, we have a relatively weak nonprofit housing sector in Nova Scotia compared to many other parts of the province, because this affordability challenge in housing is relatively new compared to some other parts of the province. So we absolutely see that as a core need and something that should be a priority of government. We've been pushing for that, and we will continue to. So again, I really appreciate you calling in and raising that.
Thanks very much, Al. We have time for about two more quick questions. So again, I'll ask you to keep things brief. But next we will go to Tom from Sydney. Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, yes, my name's Tom, and I'm from Sydney. And my question is, do you guys have any plan better than Houston, which did absolutely nothing for us in Cape Breton during the last snowstorm we had? And he told the mayor to, when she called to get emergency funding, to deal with it. And we're wondering if you guys have any different plans than they do.
Well, thanks so much, Tom. I mean, the first plan that we have is to treat the municipal order of government with respect, and to, acknowledge when communities are suffering that it's probably not good policy to kick folks when they're down. And, we heard that comment about the PR stuff like everyone else did, and, I was horrified by it. I thought it was mean and unnecessary. But in terms of your specifics, I think, we had a question earlier about Fiona. I think that this recent snowstorm really was, quite a natural disaster for many parts of the island. I was up there probably a week after. I still couldn't get down the sidewalk on Charlotte Street, and the snowbanks and the pier were taller than me. So, that was a real event and a real challenge. And part of the challenge is that municipalities need the financial support to be able to deal with those things when they arise. Part of the reason that the Premier was so, I think, dismissive was because, your mayor kind of gave him the gears during the municipal funding process and said that she needed Cape Breton to be dealt with fairly, and that she needed Cape Breton to get the funding that they needed to be able to deliver the services that people need. And those services include things like dealing with massive snowfalls. And this government wouldn't respond, and they wouldn't address those concerns, and then they got cranky when they got called out for it. So, I would say, what's our plan? Our plan is to listen to municipalities. Our plan is to make sure that Sydney, CBRM, and all of Cape Breton is supported in the way that it needs to be. And just recently, the mayor has written, I know, to the premier, and she has asked, the last I heard, that snowfall cost about an extra $3 million from the municipal budget. And the mayor has asked the premier to step in and offer that support, and we certainly echo her request. So I thank you for calling in, Tom, and I'm sorry, I know it's been a bit of a rough go there lately.
Yes, thank you very much, Tom, for calling in. Unfortunately, we only have time for one more quick question, and we will go to another Tom. Thomas Polk, please, go ahead.
Hello? Hello, can
Hi
you
there,
hear me?
Thomas, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I'll get straight to the point. A lot of people are too poor to afford their own vehicles anymore, and the state of the public transportation is pretty rough. They only come around like once an hour at best.
Mm-hmm. Are you in Cape Breton, Thomas?
Yes, I'm in Cape Breton.
Okay. And so is your question about improvements to transportation, public transportation?
Yes, please improve it.
Okay.
Especially at peak times, because the buses are getting really crowded.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is something we're paying really close attention to, because this is another area where I think the province needs to really step in and prioritize public transportation. And I think there's nowhere that's a bigger opportunity for that than CBRM. Because, as you say, a lot of folks in CBRM don't have a car, don't want a car, or can't afford a car. And the population has ballooned, and partly that's students at CBRM, and partly that's economic opportunities. But the reality is that it's really hard to get around. And this comes back to the question we were answering in the last call, which was around appropriate funding for CBRM. This is a funding question. Public transportation is a public good. We pay for it, but, in an ideal world, we wouldn't. We would have access to it. And, we have a government that's fixated on roads and people's cars and helping their friends, and they're not paying attention to things like buses and people who need to get to work and people who just need to get around. I see people walking on the side of the road all the time when I'm in the area, and I know that that's not a choice. It's because there's no other option. And so, I totally agree with you that we need to rapidly increase the access to public transportation in CBRM, and I think the province has a big role to play, and it's certainly something we're on the record as supporting. So I thank you for calling in, Tom.
Yes, thank you very much. And we have to wrap up now, folks, but I just want to say a couple of last things. There was one caller who talked about needing more access to the Premier of Nova Scotia, and I think she got it, because I think we've been listening to the next Premier of Nova Scotia, Claudia Chender, here tonight, folks. Thank you so much for calling in with your questions. If we didn't get to you, we apologize. You can call our number at our Halifax office at 902-423-9217 and leave a voice message. Or you can also email feedback@nsndp.ca to get a question into us, and someone will get back to you as soon as we are able. The other thing I'd say is, if you have sort of general questions about the NDP's position on various things, you can always go to our website, which is www.nsndp.ca, and there's a section there about us, but there's also a section on media releases, so you can see a lot of what we've been talking about lately in that area. So this draws our town hall to a close. Again, thank you so much to everyone who called in, and please don't hesitate to get in touch in other ways. And with that, I will wish you all a very good night, and please take care.